I came home from work on a Tuesday evening in February to find my driveway covered in fresh snow and ice, which was odd because the heating cables I had installed should have kept it clear. The temperature in Boulder, Colorado had dropped to 15 degrees, and my entire street was a winter mess, but my driveway should have been bone dry. Something was very wrong. I parked on the street and walked up to my house, noticing immediately that the control box mounted on the side of my garage was hanging open, wires dangling like severed arteries. My stomach dropped. Those cables had cost me nearly $8,000 to install last year, and they were connected to a private electrical system I managed for the entire neighborhood. Not the standard grid, mind you, but a specialized substation that I personally controlled as part of my job with Boulder Municipal Electric. The setup was unusual, I admit. When I bought the house 3 years ago at 2847 Cascade Avenue, the property came with an easement that included a small electrical substation in my backyard. The previous owner had been an electrical engineer who had worked out a deal with the city to maintain a backup power system for the surrounding blocks. When he retired and moved to Arizona, I inherited both the house and the responsibility. The city paid me a decent stipend to monitor and maintain it, and in return, I got to run my own systems off it at cost. The driveway heating cables were one of those perks. I inspected the damage more closely. Someone had not just disconnected the cables, they had physically cut them and ripped them out of the concrete. Sections of my driveway had chunks missing where they had pried up the heating elements. This was not vandalism. This was targeted destruction. My phone rang. It was my neighbor, Doug Peterson, from 2 houses down. "Vincent, you see what happened to your driveway?" he asked. "I am looking at it right now. You know who did this?" "Oh, I know exactly who did it. Brenda Whitmore from the HOA. She was here this morning with a crew. Said your heating cables were against association rules and that she was authorized to remove them." My blood went cold, then immediately hot. Brenda did what? She had 2 guys with her, and they spent about 3 hours ripping everything out. She was parading around with her clipboard, talking about how you were in violation of Section 12.7 of the HOA bylaws. I told her she should probably talk to you first, but she said she had already sent you 3 notices. I had received exactly 0 notices. I checked my mail obsessively because of work documents, and there had been nothing from the HOA. Not that it mattered. You could not just destroy someone's property, even if there was a violation. "Thanks for letting me know, Doug. I need to make some calls." I hung up and immediately dialed Brenda's number. It was in the neighborhood directory that got posted through our doors every year. She answered on the second ring, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "This is Brenda Whitmore, HOA president. How may I help you?" "Brenda, this is Vincent Lawrence from Cascade Avenue. You want to explain why my driveway heating system is destroyed." "Oh, Vincent, I am so glad you called. I sent you multiple notices about the violation. Those heating cables are not permitted under our association guidelines. They create an unfair aesthetic advantage and use excessive energy." "Aesthetic advantage? They keep my driveway clear, and you did not send me anything." "I certainly did. 3 certified letters over the past 6 weeks. If you did not receive them, that is a postal issue, not an HOA issue. Regardless, the violation has been remedied." My hands were shaking. "Remedied? You destroyed $8,000 worth of equipment without my permission. That is not remedying anything. That is vandalism. It is authorized enforcement of HOA regulations. I suggest you review your bylaws. Section 12.7 clearly states that all external heating systems require board approval, which you never sought. Furthermore, Section 18.3 gives the board authority to remove violations after proper notice has been provided. What notice? I never got anything from you. Again, not my problem. The notices were sent via certified mail to your address on file. Now, you will also be receiving a fine for the violation. $200 per day from the date of the first notice, which was January 3rd. That brings your total to $9,400. Payment is due within 30 days. I actually laughed. It was either that or scream. You are insane if you think I am paying that. Then we will place a lien on your property. Have a wonderful evening, Vincent. She hung up. I stood in my garage, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. Brenda Whitmore had been the HOA president for about 8 months, ever since the previous president moved away. She was a 52-year-old former real estate agent who seemed to view the position as her personal fiefdom. I had only interacted with her a handful of times, mostly at neighborhood barbecues, where she complained about everything from people's mailbox colors to how often they mowed their lawns. But this was different. This was destruction of property and extortion. I called my lawyer, Robert Chen, who I had used when buying the house. He listened to my story and let out a low whistle. That is a mess, Vincent. The HOA probably does have authority to enforce violations, but they absolutely cannot just destroy your property without going through proper channels. Even with notices, they would typically need to get a court order for something like this. So what do I do? Document everything. Take photos, get statements from neighbors who saw it happen, and save any communication you have with Brenda. Then we file a lawsuit for destruction of property and probably get a restraining order to prevent further action. But I have to warn you, this is going to be expensive and time-consuming. How expensive, if it goes to trial? Could be $20,000 to $30,000 in legal fees, maybe more if she fights hard. I hung up feeling even worse. The smart play was probably to eat the loss and move on, but something in me refused. Brenda had crossed a line and she needed to understand there were consequences. Then I remembered something. Something important. Those heating cables were not just connected to my house. They were connected to the substation. And when Brenda's crew had ripped them out, they had damaged some of the control systems for the entire grid. I walked out to the backyard where the substation sat behind a tall fence. The padlock was still secure, but when I opened it and went inside, I could see the problem immediately. The heating cables had been integrated into the substation's auxiliary power system. It was a clever bit of engineering by the previous owner, using waste heat and excess capacity to run the driveway system at virtually no cost. But it also meant the cables were technically part of the substation infrastructure. And when Brenda's crew had cut them, they had severed several control lines. Nothing critical was down, but the backup systems were compromised. If there was a power surge or a failure in the main grid, the automatic switching systems would not work properly. The neighborhood could be without power for hours or even days until repairs could be made, and Brenda had no idea what she had done. I took photos of everything, then called my supervisor at Boulder Municipal Electric, a gruff 58-year-old engineer named Tom Hartley. Tom, we have a problem with the Cascade substation. What kind of problem? Someone damaged the auxiliary systems. Cut right through some of the control lines. Damaged? How? I explained the situation. There was a long silence on the other end. Let me get this straight, Tom finally said. Your HOA president ripped out your driveway heating cables, which were integrated into a municipal electrical substation, and in doing so compromised the backup power systems for an entire neighborhood. That is correct. Jesus Christ, Vincent. This is not just a civil matter anymore. She damaged city infrastructure. That is a criminal offense. What do you want me to do? I am calling the police right now. Do not touch anything else. I am coming out there with a crew first thing tomorrow morning to assess the damage. And Vincent, document everything. The police arrived about 40 minutes later. 2 officers, one older and one younger, took my statement and examined the damage. The older officer, whose name tag read Martinez, shook his head as I showed him the severed cables. And you are saying the HOA president authorized this? According to my neighbor, she was here personally supervising. We are going to need to talk to her. What is her address? I gave them Brenda's information. They left, and I spent the rest of the evening photographing every angle of the damage and writing down everything I could remember. Doug called me around 9 that night. Vincent, 2 cops just went into Brenda's house. What the hell is going on? She damaged more than just my property. She cut into city electrical infrastructure. Oh man, she is going to lose her mind. He was right. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Brenda, and she was screaming. You called the police on me. Are you insane? You damaged a municipal electrical substation. That is a crime. I did no such thing. I removed your illegal heating cables. Those cables were part of the substation control systems. You did not just vandalize my property. You compromised power for the entire neighborhood. That is ridiculous. They were just driveway heaters. Tell that to the police, and probably the city attorney's office when they get involved. She sputtered something incoherent and hung up. I allowed myself a small smile. It was petty, but it felt good. Tom arrived the next morning with a 4-person crew. They spent 3 hours examining the substation and the damaged cables. When Tom emerged from the backyard, his face was grim. How bad? I asked. Bad. The control systems for the automatic transfer switches are completely compromised. If we have a grid failure right now, this whole neighborhood goes dark until we can manually switch things over. That could be hours. Maybe longer if it happens at night or during bad weather. Can you fix it? We can, but it is going to take time and money. I am estimating about $15,000 in repairs and replacement parts, maybe more once we get into it. I felt sick. And that is on me. No, that is on whoever damaged it, which, according to your statement, is your HOA president. The city is going to go after her for the costs and probably press charges. What kind of charges? Criminal mischief at minimum. Possibly more if the DA decides to make an example. This is critical infrastructure, Vincent. People take that seriously. Over the next few days, things escalated quickly. The city filed a police report and sent Brenda a demand letter for the repair costs. She responded by doubling down, sending an email to the entire HOA mailing list, claiming that I had illegally connected my personal property to city infrastructure, and that she was the victim of a malicious smear campaign. The email was unhinged. She claimed I was trying to defraud the HOA, that I was stealing electricity from my neighbors, and that I had threatened her physically when she tried to enforce the rules. None of it was true, but enough people in the neighborhood either believed her or wanted to stay out of it that I started getting cold shoulders at the grocery store. My lawyer, Robert, filed a civil lawsuit against Brenda personally and the HOA for destruction of property, seeking damages for the heating cables plus legal fees. The HOA's lawyer, a tired-looking woman named Sandra Moss, reached out to try to negotiate a settlement. My client is willing to drop the fines if you drop the lawsuit, she said during a phone call. Your client destroyed $8,000 worth of my property and another $15,000 in city infrastructure. I am not dropping anything. Mr. Lawrence, I understand you are upset, but HOAs have broad authority to enforce rules. If you fight this, You might not win, and even if you do, you will spend more in legal fees than you will recover. Maybe, but at least Brenda will learn she cannot just do whatever she wants. Sandra sighed. I will be honest with you. Brenda is difficult to work with. The HOA board is actually considering removing her, but that takes time. If you can be patient, I am done being patient. See you in court. The case moved slowly through the system. In the meantime, the city finished the repairs to the substation and sent Brenda a bill for $18,743. She refused to pay, claiming the city was complicit in my fraud. The city attorney's office was not amused. In early April, Brenda was formally charged with criminal mischief and destruction of city property. Both were misdemeanors, but they carried potential jail time and significant fines. Her arraignment was scheduled for late April. The neighborhood was in an uproar. Half the people thought Brenda was being persecuted for doing her job. The other half thought she had gone completely off the rails and needed to be stopped. There was a recall petition circulated to remove her as HOA president, but it needed 60% of homeowners to sign, and it was moving slowly. Then Brenda made her biggest mistake. In mid-April, I came home to find that my mailbox had been removed. Not knocked over, not damaged, but completely removed. The post had been cut off at ground level and the mailbox itself was gone. I called the police, and Officer Martinez came out to take a report. You think it was her again? He asked. Who else would it be? Problem is, we need proof. Do you have any cameras? I did not, but Doug did. I asked him to check his footage, and sure enough, there was Brenda at 3 in the morning with a reciprocating saw, cutting down my mailbox and tossing it into the back of her SUV. Got her, Doug said, showing me the footage on his phone. The police arrested Brenda that afternoon. She was charged with theft and another count of criminal mischief. The judge set bail at $5,000, which she posted, but the damage to her reputation was done. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove her as president. She threatened to sue them too, but nobody took her seriously anymore. The civil lawsuit went to mediation in early June. Brenda showed up with Sandra Moss and a huge binder full of printouts, convinced she was going to prove I had been running some kind of elaborate scam. The mediator, a patient man in his 60s named Gerald Morrison, listened to her rant for about 15 minutes before cutting her off. Mrs. Whitmore, I have reviewed the case files. You destroyed Mr. Lawrence's property without proper authorization. You damaged city infrastructure. And you stole his mailbox. I'm not sure what you think you are going to prove here. He was violating HOA rules, she insisted. Even if that were true, and I am not convinced it is, you do not have the right to destroy property. That is what courts are for. We eventually settled. The HOA's insurance paid me $12,000 to cover the cost of the heating cables, plus some of my legal fees. Brenda personally paid me another $3,000 for the mailbox and additional damages. She also agreed to drop all fines and liens against my property. The criminal cases took longer. Brenda pled no contest to the misdemeanor charges in September and was sentenced to 6 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay full restitution to the city. The judge also ordered her to attend anger management classes. Mrs. Whitmore, the judge said during sentencing, you seem to believe that being HOA president gave you unlimited authority to do whatever you wanted. Let me be clear, it does not. You are not above the law. You cannot destroy property just because you think it violates a rule. You cannot steal from people. And you certainly cannot damage critical city infrastructure because you are having a power trip. I hope you use this probation period to reflect on your actions and make better choices in the future. Brenda left the courtroom in tears. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. The new HOA president was a retired teacher named Margaret Sullivan, who immediately sent an email to the entire neighborhood apologizing for Brenda's actions and promising a more collaborative approach going forward. She personally called me to ask if there was anything the HOA could do to make amends. "Just leave me alone," I said, not unkindly. "I just want to live my life. I understand, and for what it is worth, I am sorry about everything that happened." I had the heating cables reinstalled in October, just in time for the first snow. This time, I made sure to get explicit written approval from the HOA board, even though I was not sure it was legally required. Margaret signed off on it within 24 hours. The first big snowstorm hit in early November. My driveway was clear and dry while the rest of the street struggled with ice and snow. A few neighbors asked about getting their own systems installed, and I gave them the contact information for the company I had used. No sense in being petty. Doug invited me over for Thanksgiving dinner, which I appreciated since my family was all back in Ohio and I had not planned to travel. Over turkey and stuffing, he raised a glass to Vincent for standing up to HOA tyranny. "I will drink to that," his wife said. We clinked glasses and I felt something loosen in my chest. The whole ordeal had been exhausting and expensive, but it was over. Brenda was gone. The HOA was under new management. My driveway was fixed. Life was getting back to normal, but the story was not quite finished. In late December, I got a letter from Sandra Moss, the HOA's former attorney. Inside was a check for $750 and a note that said, "Additional funds recovered from HOA insurance claim. Your portion of the settlement. Apologies for the delay." I stared at the check for a long moment, then deposited it into my account. The whole ordeal had cost me about $10,000 out of pocket when all was said and done, even with the settlements. The additional $750 barely made a dent, but it was something. I was at the grocery store in January when I ran into Brenda. She was in the produce section, looking tired and older than I remembered. She saw me and froze, clearly debating whether to run or try to talk. I made the decision for her. "Brenda." "Vincent." She clutched her shopping cart like a shield. "I know you probably do not want to hear this, but I am sorry for everything." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. All I saw was exhaustion. "Okay." I was under a lot of stress and I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought the rules mattered more than anything and I let that blind me. I should have talked to you. I should have listened when people told me to slow down. "Yeah, you should have," she nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I lost my job, you know. The school district did not want to keep someone with a criminal record, even for misdemeanors. My husband is threatening to leave. I ruined my life over a stupid driveway. I could have twisted the knife. Could have told her she deserved it, that she brought it all on herself. But looking at her, I just felt tired. I hope you figure things out, Brenda. I really do." She looked surprised, then grateful. "Thank you. That means more than you know." We went our separate ways, and I never saw her again. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband moved to Denver a few months later, trying to start fresh away from the wreckage of her time as HOA president. The substation in my backyard hummed quietly that winter, keeping the power flowing to the neighborhood. The heating cables kept my driveway clear through multiple snowstorms. And I went to work, came home, and lived my life without drama or conflict. Margaret sent out quarterly HOA newsletters that were reasonable and boring, exactly what an HOA newsletter should be. There were updates about street maintenance, reminders about trash pickup schedules, and notices about the annual neighborhood barbecue. No threats, no fines, no power trips. In March, almost exactly a year after Brenda had destroyed my heating cables, I got a letter from the city. It was a formal thank you for maintaining the Cascade Avenue substation, and a notification that my stipend was being increased by 15% in recognition of the additional responsibilities and the complications from the previous year. We appreciate your professionalism and dedication during a difficult situation, the letter said. Your management of the substation continues to be exemplary. I put the letter on my refrigerator with a magnet. It felt like closure, official recognition that I had handled everything correctly and that the system had worked, even if it had taken longer than I would have liked. Doug came over that evening with a 6-pack of beer. Saw the city trucks earlier. Everything okay with the substation? Just routine maintenance. Everything is fine. Good. Hey, Margaret is talking about doing a neighborhood cleanup day in April. You interested? Maybe. Depends on the day. We sat on my back porch, drinking beer and watching the sun set over the mountains. The substation hummed in the background, a constant reminder of the strange intersection of my personal life and professional responsibilities that had caused so much trouble. You know what the funny thing is? Doug said after his second beer. Brenda probably could have gotten you to remove those cables if she had just asked nicely and worked with you. Maybe helped you find a compromise or a way to get them approved properly. But she was so convinced that being HOA president meant she was in charge of everything that she destroyed her own life. Yeah, it is kind of sad when you think about it. Kind of. It is incredibly sad. She had a good life, a good job, a decent marriage. And she threw it all away because she could not stand the idea that someone might be breaking an HOA rule. I thought about that for a while. Doug was right. Brenda had not been evil or malicious, just inflexible and convinced of her own righteousness. In another context, those qualities might have been virtues, but as HOA president, they had been toxic. I hope she is doing okay in Denver, I said. Yeah, me too. The neighborhood barbecue that summer was the best attended in years. Margaret had sent out personal invitations and made sure there were vegetarian options and activities for kids. She gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition and promising to run the HOA with transparency and respect. We are all neighbors first, she said. The HOA is here to help maintain our community, not to control it. If you ever have concerns or questions, my door is always open. People actually applauded. It was a far cry from Brenda's reign, where HOA meetings had been tense affairs where she lectured people about violations and handed out fines like candy. I found myself talking to neighbors I had barely known before. Sarah Tompkins, who lived across the street, mentioned she was thinking about getting solar panels and wanted to know if the HOA would give her trouble. Talk to Margaret, I said. She is reasonable. Just fill out the paperwork and explain what you are planning. As long as it is not dangerous or completely crazy, she will probably approve it. What if she does not? Then you talk it through and find a compromise. That is how it is supposed to work. Sarah looked relieved. God, it is nice to have a normal HOA again. Brenda had me so stressed I was thinking about moving. I heard similar stories throughout the evening. Brenda had not just targeted me, she had made life miserable for dozens of people. Someone had painted their front door the wrong shade of gray. Someone else had put up a flag she did not like. Another person had their trash cans visible from the street on a non-trash day. Each time, Brenda had responded with fines, threats, and aggressive enforcement. She sent me a bill for $4,000 because my fence was 6 inches too tall, one neighbor said. $4,000. I had to hire a lawyer just to fight it. The more I heard, the more I realized how lucky I had been. Yes, Brenda had destroyed my property and cost me a lot of money and stress. But I had the resources and knowledge to fight back. A lot of people did not. They had just paid her fines and lived in fear of the next violation notice. Margaret heard these stories too, and she made a point of reviewing every fine Brenda had issued. Working with the HOA board and their attorney, she sent out letters to about 30 homeowners offering to refund fines that had been excessive or improperly assessed. "It is coming out of the HOA's reserves," she explained at a board meeting that was open to the neighborhood. "But it is the right thing to do. Brenda abused her authority, and people should not have to pay for that." The motion passed unanimously. Several people got checks in the mail over the next few weeks, ranging from a few hundred to several $1,000s. It was not much in the grand scheme of things, but it sent a message. The HOA was under new management, and things were going to be different. I got back into my routine. Work at Boulder Municipal Electric was steady. The substation required occasional maintenance, but nothing major. My driveway heating cables worked perfectly through another winter. Life was good. In February, 2 years after the initial incident, I got a call from Officer Martinez. "Vincent, this is probably nothing, but I wanted to give you a heads up. Brenda Whitmore is back in Boulder." My stomach tightened. "Why are you telling me this? She is not supposed to contact you per the terms of her probation, but that ended last month. I just wanted to make sure you knew in case she tries to reach out." "Do you think she will?" "Honestly, I do not know. She seems to have calmed down since the trial, but people can be unpredictable. Just keep your doors locked and call us if she shows up at your house." She never did, but about a week later I got a letter in the mail. The return address was from Denver, and the handwriting on the envelope was neat and precise. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single page handwritten. "Dear Vincent, I know I have already apologized, but I wanted to write to you one more time. I have spent the last 2 years in therapy trying to understand why I acted the way I did, and I have come to realize that I was using the HOA as a way to feel in control of my life. I had just been laid off from my real estate job. My marriage was struggling, and I felt powerless. Being HOA president made me feel important and powerful, and I became obsessed with enforcing rules because it was the one area where I had authority. None of that excuses what I did to you. You were right, and I was wrong. I destroyed your property, damaged city infrastructure, and made your life hell for no good reason. I am deeply sorry. I am working as a receptionist now in Denver. It is not glamorous, but it is honest work, and I am trying to rebuild my life. My husband and I are in counseling, and things are slowly getting better. I do not expect you to forgive me, and I am not asking you to. I just wanted you to know that I understand the harm I caused, and I am genuinely sorry. I hope you are doing well. Brenda Whitmore. I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in a drawer. I did not write back. There was nothing more to say. Brenda had apologized. She was working on herself, and that was enough. Forgiveness was not something I was ready to give, but I could accept that she was trying to be better. Spring came to Boulder with the usual explosion of wildflowers and sunshine. The neighborhood held its cleanup day, and I spent a Saturday picking up trash along the street and helping trim trees in the common areas. Margaret brought coffee and donuts, and everyone was in a good mood. "You know what I love about this?" Doug said, filling a trash bag with old leaves. "We are just neighbors helping neighbors. No drama, no power trips, just people working together. That is how it should be. Yeah, too bad it took a near disaster to get here." I thought about that as I worked. Doug was right. Brenda's rampage had been a disaster, but it had also been a wake-up call for the neighborhood. People were more engaged now, more aware of what the HOA was doing and more willing to speak up if something seemed wrong. Margaret was a good president because the neighborhood had learned what a bad president looked like. In May, the city asked me to give a presentation at a municipal infrastructure conference about managing residential substations. I talked about the technical aspects, the relationship with the neighborhood, and the importance of clear communication with both the city and local organizations like HOAs. During the Q&A, someone asked about the incident with Brenda. How did you handle the situation when your HOA damaged the substation? I documented everything, worked with my supervisor and the police, and let the system handle it. The key was staying professional and not letting emotions drive my decisions. It was tempting to retaliate or escalate, but that would have just made things worse. What would you have done differently? I thought about that for a moment. I would have tried harder to communicate with the HOA before installing the heating cables. Even though I did not think I needed their approval, it would have saved a lot of trouble to just get it in writing. Sometimes doing things the right way means doing extra work upfront to avoid problems later. The answer felt true. I had been technically correct about not needing HOA approval, but I had also been a little arrogant about it. If I had just talked to the board and explained what I was doing, Brenda might not have felt threatened or confused. She still might have gone off the rails, but I could have at least tried to prevent it. After the presentation, a woman approached me. She introduced herself as Karen Chen, a city council member from Fort Collins. That was a fascinating story. We have been dealing with some similar issues in our community, with HOAs overstepping their authority. Would you be willing to testify at a hearing about potential HOA reforms? What kind of reforms? Requiring HOA boards to carry insurance, creating clearer guidelines about what they can and cannot do, maybe establishing an ombudsman office that can mediate disputes before they escalate. Your case is a perfect example of why these reforms are needed. I agreed, and in July I drove to Fort Collins to testify before the city council. I told my story, emphasizing both Brenda's overreach and the importance of having systems in place to check that power. The council listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions. Do you think stricter regulations would have prevented what happened to you? One council member asked. Maybe. If there had been a requirement for HOA boards to get liability insurance, Brenda might have been more cautious. If there had been an ombudsman office, I might have been able to resolve things without going to court. But honestly, the biggest problem was that Brenda did not understand the limits of her authority. Better education and training for HOA board members might have helped more than any regulation. The council thanked me for my testimony. I do not know if anything came of it, but it felt good to contribute to the conversation. By the time fall rolled around, the whole ordeal felt like ancient history. The neighborhood was stable. The HOA was functioning properly. My driveway heating cables worked perfectly. Work was good. Life was good. I was having coffee with Doug one Saturday morning when he brought up Brenda. You ever wonder what she is doing now? Not really. I got a letter from her a while back. She is in Denver, working as a receptionist trying to rebuild her life. You write back. No, what would I say? Doug nodded. Fair enough. I hope she figured things out. She was not a bad person, just a bad HOA president. Yeah. Sometimes people get a little bit of power and do not know how to handle it. Ain't that the truth? We finished our coffee and went our separate ways. I spent the afternoon working on the substation, replacing some aging components and updating the monitoring systems. It was satisfying work, solving problems and keeping the infrastructure running smoothly. As the sun set and I closed up the substation, I looked at my driveway. You could barely tell it had been torn up 2 years ago. The new heating cables were installed properly, the concrete had been repaired, and everything looked normal. It was like the whole incident had never happened, except for the memories and the lessons learned. I went inside, made dinner, and settled in for the evening. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. HOA board meeting next week. Do you have any issues to discuss? I typed back. No issues, all good here. And it was true. All the drama, all the conflict, all the stress had faded into the past. Life had returned to normal, which was all I had wanted in the first place. The winter was mild that year, with only a few significant snowstorms. Each time, my driveway heating cables kept everything clear, while the rest of the neighborhood struggled with ice and snow. A few more people got their own systems installed, and Margaret approved every request without drama or delay. In March, on the 3-year anniversary of the incident, I found myself thinking about Brenda again. I wondered if she was still in Denver, still working on rebuilding her life. I hoped she was doing better, that she had learned from her mistakes and found some peace. But mostly, I was just grateful it was over. Grateful that the system had worked, that justice had been served, and that life had moved on. The substation in my backyard continued to hum, keeping the lights on for the neighborhood. My driveway stayed clear. And I went to work, came home, and lived my life without drama. That was all I had ever wanted, just to be left alone to live my life in peace. It had taken a lawsuit, criminal charges, and 2 years of stress to get there, but in the end, it had been worth it. Brenda had learned that HOA presidents are not dictators. The neighborhood had learned to hold their leaders accountable. And I had learned that sometimes standing up for yourself is hard and expensive, but necessary. The story could have ended badly. Brenda could have gotten away with it. The HOA could have bankrupted me with fines and legal fees. The city could have decided the damage to the substation was somehow my fault. But none of that happened. The system worked, justice was served, and life went on. As I sat on my back porch that evening, watching the sunset and listening to the quiet hum of the substation, I felt a sense of peace. The ordeal had been terrible while it was happening, but it was over now. Brenda was gone. The HOA was fixed. My property was restored. And I had learned valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, working within the system, and the importance of clear communication. Doug came over with his usual 6-pack, and we sat together in comfortable silence. "You ever think about moving?" he asked after a while. "Not really. Why? I do not know. After everything that happened, I figured you might want a fresh start somewhere else. This is my home. I am not letting one crazy HOA president drive me away. Good. I would miss having you as a neighbor." We clinked our bottles together and watched the stars come out over the mountains. Life in Boulder was good. The neighborhood was good. The HOA was good. Everything was finally, blessedly, normal. And that was exactly how I wanted it to stay.